All right, we're going to fast forward in terms of history and talk about some contemporary religions. We've discussed traditions that are thousands of years old, and now we'll look at some religions and faiths and traditions that developed in this century, last century, and the 19th century. So these are the four things we're going to do in this lecture. We're going to talk about a faith called Baha'i. We're going to talk about Neo-paganism and New Age traditions, including Wicca. We're going to talk about the distinction or the difference between cults and religion. Are cults part of religions? Are they distinct? Who's to say whether or not something is a cult? And then we'll talk about Scientology and discuss whether or not it counts as a religion. So we'll start with Baha'i. Baha'i emphasizes the oneness of all religions. The idea is when you zoom out, religions actually have a lot of similarities. There are many common threads and themes about most faiths, including love, compassion, forgiveness, tolerance, contentment. It's only when you zoom in do you see differences that can lead to conflict. And so if we keep that zoomed out perspective, that can actually bring people together. Develops in the 19th century, so the 1800s, in Persia, so that's present day Iran. And there are about 6 million plus adherents or followers today. The name of the founder is a man called Baha'u'llah, and he was actually born a Muslim. His parents were an Islamic family, part of the Shia Muslim sect in 1817. So one of the messages of Baha'i is that there are many paths to revelation. In other words, God's message is revealed via the teachers of many religions. So these teachers could be Mahavira from Jainism, it could be Siddhartha from Buddhism, it could be Jesus from Christianity, it could be Abraham from Judaism, it could be Muhammad from Islam, etc. Baha'i also stresses world order, so not just togetherness in terms of religion, but in terms of the state and government, one world government. Here's the symbol for Baha'i, and it makes sense that it's a many-pointed star. Each of those points, of course, represents the different paths, the diverse perspectives, different religious perspectives. So you could write in, for every point of the star, you could write in Islam and Christianity and Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism and Sikhism for each of those points. And if you count them up, you get 9 points. But this isn't to say that there are 9 and only 9 faiths that lead to revelation or lead to truth. It's just it's a star with lots of points, and it could have 100 points or an infinite amount of points. So it's not. Don't get focused on the 9. The idea is that there's just many ways to arrive at the kind of point of religion, which is those things I mentioned: love, compassion, respect for each other, empathy, forgiveness, contentment, peace. Here's an image of Baha'u'llah. And one of the oldest, most famous Baha'i temples is actually in India, and it's called the Lotus Temple. You could tell it's shaped like a lotus flower. So here it is at night. So that's really all I want you to know about Baha'i. Let's transition to Neo-paganism. Neo-paganism emphasizes Mother Nature and femininity, and animism. Remember, we talked about animism a couple times in the course. For instance, when we discussed Shinto. And you think animal when you hear that word animism, but remember, animism is really about being animated. It's about being alive. So animism is the view that there are many parts of nature that are spiritually alive, more than just human beings, including animals, but also plants and trees, all the flora and fauna, and sometimes even inanimate objects actually have a spirit. So nature in general, which can include bodies of water and oceans and rivers and the moon and the planet as a whole. So that's what animism is, and that's stressed by neo-pagans. So neo, that prefix, roughly means new, and pagan is a very old term, and it actually predates Christianity. So when Christianity started to become popular, it would be kind of an insult to call someone a pagan. It meant that you're basically non-Christian. And so these traditions that are older than Christianity, there's been kind of a revivalism of them, hence the term new paganism, neo-paganism. And one form of neo-paganism is Wicca, which is connected to magic and witchcraft. Because the sanctity and religiosity of nature is emphasized, of course, the changing of the seasons and the lunar cycle are going to be important to neo-pagans, and it's a very polytheistic tradition because there are spirits in all these aspects of nature. Some neo-pagans believe in the Gaia hypothesis. So Gaia is the name of a Greek earth goddess, and it's essentially the idea that the earth is alive, the earth is a being, the earth is a person. That, Mother Nature is often the name given to this person, and it's a person that is composed of all of the life on the planet. So it's a kind of what's called a Gestalt concept, that the sum is more than the parts. So the earth is just not the set of all the beings and persons and life on the planet, but when you put all those together, you get something more, which is the earth as an individual, as a being, as a person, and that's the Gaia hypothesis. So old pagan, as I mentioned, that's religions that predate Christianity. And Wicca, we talked about, is one form of neo-paganism that's connected to magic and witchcraft. This symbol is associated with neo-paganism. So what do you see when you look at that? Well, a lot of you might see or think of the moon. And that's exactly what this is, the changing of the cycles of the moon. So the moon comes in phases, waxing and waning. So when the moon is kind of getting bigger each night, that's when it's waxing. The moon is waxing. It's the phases are, it's getting closer and closer to full. And then after it's full, it starts to diminish, and that's when the cycles are waning. So waxing and waning are those two terms, the lunar cycle. And women have natural cycles that are also kind of on a lunar, are on the lunar cycle, kind of a monthly cycle. And so motherhood and femininity are an important part of this religion. This image isn't famously associated with neo-paganism or these sorts of traditions, but I just think that it's a beautiful painting that when I think of Gaia, of what the earth as a person might be, this image I think captures that, with just all the colors and all the animals that are part of Gaia's consciousness. This is a very old symbol, the pentagram, the five-pointed star, and it's also associated with neo-paganism. So the points in this star, they have a significance. So 4 of them are the 4 elements that are those 4 traditional elements that you know, I'm sure. Earth and air and water and fire. And then you might be saying, well, that's four. There's five there. What's the fifth one? The fifth point represents spirits. So you've got earth and air and water and fire, and then you have spirit. That's the fifth. And then what about the circle around it? That represents the unity of all the elements in the spirit and the oneness of everything that is alive. Some of you might have seen a Satanist symbol that looks like this, but it's actually usually flipped upside down to represent kind of the horns of Satan or the devil. If you flip it upside down, then you've got two of the points that are kind of at the top, and those kind of represent the horns. New Age religions are kind of a part of this neo-pagan movement, so it shares some territory with neo-paganism. It's very amorphous, so that means that it's kind of vaguely defined, and it's hard to delineate or specify what's in and what's out in terms of what counts as this tradition or faith. But some of the things that are emphasized are ESP, so it's extrasensory perception, clairvoyance or telepathy. Clairvoyance is the ability to kind of see the future. Telepathy is being able to control things with your mind. So these are perceptions that go beyond the five senses that we have. Communing with spirit, being able to communicate with spirits. There's some mixture into sci-fi and fantasy. A lot of people that are into those genres also sometimes overlap with this New Age movement. There can be festivals where people come together, and there's dancing and music, and sometimes use of drugs that are hallucinogens to induce a sort of trance. These are all part of New Age religions. Let's talk about cults now. Cults are really hard to define. No one who is in a so-called cult will say, I'm in a cult. Members of these so-called cults will say, no, I'm a part of something that's real and revolutionary and is true. So it's an interesting term because it's really applied only by outsiders. It's people who are outside of this group pointing at the group, saying it's illegitimate, calling it a cult. So from the inside, it's not a cult. It's a good religion or a true religion. And from the outside, those are the people that are going to use that label. One of the themes if there's going to be a common thread to groups that have been called cults, is this idea of millennialism, which is the idea that the end of the world is near, and often they are connected to tragedy. So we're going to talk about two groups that have been called cults. One of them is Heaven's Gate. So we'll come back to this image. There's a couple interesting things about it after we go through these details. So Heaven's Gate was a group that was popular in the 1970s, and there was this married couple, Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Trousdale, who were the leaders of it. And the belief is that aliens from another planet would come and would take away the true believers, would take them to the next level. And 39 people at least committed suicide because they thought the aliens had arrived, and they were going to leave their bodies perhaps, and their spirits were going to be zapped up or sucked up by these alien spacecraft, these UFOs. So I actually remember this when I was in high school. There was this comet that you could see, for about a month or two. It was called Hale-Bopp. And in 1997, you could see it whenever it was a clear night. And so the members of this group of Heaven's Gate, they thought that the coinciding of this comet passing close to the Earth was a sign that these aliens from another world were going to come to get the true believers. And so that's when there was the mass suicide of 39 people. And this next level where they went, it would be genderless, would be one of the things. So you kind of go beyond your human form. So we'll go back to the image now, and there's a couple things going on with this gate part. So what do you see? Just look at it for a second, maybe pause and ask yourself, what do you see with that gate? Well, a lot of you might see, oh, I see a keyhole, right? Well, yeah, so this group is the key to getting to the next level, to some spiritual enlightenment. But the other second secret meaning of this image is the G is actually the UFO. And then the ATE is the beam coming down from the spaceship, grabbing up all the true believers. So I think that's an interesting double meaning, that the keyhole through the gate, heaven's gate, and then into the heavens where the aliens are, that's the ship that's grabbing them up. Very creative image there. So another so-called cult we're going to talk about, probably the most famous one, is the People's Temples cult. That was also in the 70s, 1978, when it became popular. The leader was this man named Jim Jones, and he brought people to South America in a country called Guyana, a city known as Jonestown, Guyana. And instead of a mass suicide of 38 or some odd people, almost 1,000 people got together and had a mass suicide. So that's why this one made the news. If you've ever heard the saying, "Yo, you're drinking the Kool-Aid or don't drink the Kool-Aid," that is that's connected with this cult, because that's how people committed suicide. They passed around this Kool-Aid, but it was laced with poison. It was laced with potassium cyanide, and a lot of these people that drank this Kool-Aid, they died from poisoning. All right, that's all. I just wanted to do, just like a really quick bit on New Age religions, Neo-paganism, and Baha'i and cult. We'll spend the rest of this lecture talking about Scientology and whether or not it counts as a true religion. So I'm not so much going to give you the answer to that question. I'll let you think about it for your own. I'm just going to give you some of the information in the background and the details of the tradition, and you can kind of decide for yourself whether or not you think it should count as a religion or not. It's developed in the 20th century, in the 1950s, by this author named L. Ron Hubbard. And under this tradition, human beings are spiritual, and we're very ancient beings. We've forgotten our true natures. And the way that you discover or rediscover these true natures is through a method called auditing. That's where you kind of reflect, and there's a sort of meditation element to it, and you reach back into the past and try to dredge up these very old memories. And it's a process of self-identification, of discovering your true nature, your true identity. So in auditing, practitioners, they'll free themselves by trying to relive these traumatic experiences. So we know from psychology that people will bury memories. If sometimes there'll be a traumatic event, like a bad car accident, or something will happen when someone's really young. It's really traumatic, and they will bury the memories, and they won't be able to remember them. So, but then through therapy, they can get into access. So they can access these memories. It's a defense mechanism to forget, because it's so painful at the time, and people's minds aren't mature enough to process these events, and so the brain just kind of locks them away, because if you can't deal with it, then just kind of put it to the side. And that's what happened. And in a grander sense, that's what's going on with this narrative that's a part of Scientology. So where people get skeptical about whether or not this is a religion is this monetary aspect to it. And there's a famous HBO documentary called Going Clear, which I recommend, that covers the details of this. And there's this monetary donation part. So if you want to get the tools to rediscover your true nature, you need help, right? Well, it's a service, right? And the way that you get the service is you pay someone for the service. So you give donations, and these donations can get very large. A lot of celebrities have gotten involved in Scientology, and they're able to provide major donations. And so a lot of people have given up a big chunk of their life savings and told to not listen, and to disconnect with anyone who's skeptical of the faith. And it's notorious for vehemently opposing psychiatry and any sort of medication that a psychiatrist would prescribe. So like antidepressants, for example, that would be a big no-no in Scientology. So is it a religion? Well, one clue to answer that question is you look at how governments have interpreted the group. Governments have to decide whether or not something's a religion because, at least in America, religions enjoy a tax-exempt status. So whenever you donate to a church or a mosque or a temple, those organizations, they get to use 100% of that money for their group because it's not for profit, and it's for, I guess, a good cause, and it's kind of a part of our First Amendment expression of giving to our churches and mosques and temples, etc. And so as a state, we decided, okay, we won't tax that money if it's a religion. Well, in the United States, Scientology is tax exempt. So the U.S., from the perspective of the U.S. government, it counts as a religion. However, there are other places like the UK, France, and Germany where Scientology is not tax exempt. So they do not consider it a religion. And in France, they have the strongest anti-position against Scientology. Excuse me. In 2009, a French court found the church guilty of fraud. So those who are skeptical might say that this is not a religion, it's a cult, and they're financially defrauding its members, and they're charging these exorbitant fees to participate in these spiritual services. Now, if it makes you happy, so be it, but if you're being tricked into thinking that it's working, or there's only a placebo effect that wears off, and then by the end you've lost connection with friends, family, and a big chunk of your savings, that can be problematic. One of the controversial policies of Scientology is this disconnection policy, where if someone is skeptical or anti-Scientology, they're saying, no, you got to get out of this, you spent all our money, or it's tearing our family apart, I want you out of this cult. The message from the Church of Scientology will be, you need to get this person out of your life. Members are encouraged to cut off all contact with friends or family who are antagonistic to Scientology. There are a lot of celebrity members. It's made headlines, so a lot of you might know that Tom Cruise has been a part of Scientology. Leah Remini from King of Queens was a big part of it, who recently left the church, and she's been in the headlines and been on television talking about her experiences. John Travolta, Kirstie Alley, they're also famous Scientologists. Lisa Marie Presley, the daughter of Elvis Presley, Jason Lee, who's a movie star. Katie Holmes, at least, was a Scientologist when she was married to Tom Cruise. One of the big parts of this auditing process and this kind of spiritual awakening process is these OT levels. OT stands for operating thetan. So a thetan is roughly a soul. We all have this soul component of ours. And we want to get to these levels where our soul is actualized, where we are in tune with who we truly are. We're these spiritual beings. We're not these physical bodies. And at these levels, you get these mystical teachings that are secretive, that will help you understand the universe and yourself, and kind of how to free yourself from all of the trials and tribulations of this earthly life. And some might say, well, why doesn't someone just give out this information? Why make it free? Why charge for it? Well, if you get it too early, then it could be harmful. That's the idea. So if people are paying hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars for his teachings, you would think, especially in this age of information and the internet, that a lot of these are being leaked and getting out. So how could the church keep these secrets? Well, they haven't been keeping the secrets. There have been internet leaks, and if you do a web search, you can find the secrets of these OT levels. But the way that they do their best to keep this a secret is they will tell people out at sea on a cruise ship. So this is the cruise ship Free Winds, you can see there, and it's a very exclusive club, and they'll have these secret little gatherings, and only there will they reveal the teachings. So what are they exactly? Well, they're what I said, that we're these ancient beings, and we've lost our identity. We need to find it, and until you do, you won't you won't be happy, and you'll have all these problems that we all have as human beings who live on this planet. So so you're much older than you think you are. How much older? Well, millions of years. So that of course runs against everything the scientific community, the vast majority of the scientific community would say. So there's a disconnect there. We're actually not from Earth. Our spirit came to Earth a long time ago. We traveled here after being chased and persecuted by a galactic tyrant known as Xenu. Yes, this is true. L. Ron Hubbard was a science fiction author before he was the founder of this religion. So if the religion sounds a lot like science fiction, that shouldn't come as too much a surprise because the founder was a science fiction writer. Xenu is a galactic tyrant. And so he was chasing after us and caught some of us. And we tried to flee from him. And we took refuge on the planet Earth. And then to smoke us out, Xenu put these. So we kind of took refuge in these animals on Earth that were these vessels, these human bodies. And then our spirit went inside them to have protection from Xenu, and to smoke us out, Xenu takes these hydrogen bombs and puts them inside a volcano and causes this explosion. Xenu stacks these spacecraft that look like Douglas DC-8 airliners, that's how they're described, these spaceships around volcanoes, and then sets off these hydrogen bombs. And these thetans, for safety, cluster together with these bodies that we're in now. What does a Douglas DC-8 airliner look like? Well, it looks something like this. Whoops. Looks like that. Basically, a commercial jet. Maybe a big one. All right, let's go to the source. We want to be fair to Scientology. We don't want to misconstrue it. So this is straight from their website, Scientology.org. Developed by L. Ron Hubbard, Scientology is a religion that offers a path to a complete understanding of one's true spiritual nature. Well, that sounds a lot like Hinduism or Buddhism and maybe even Christianity. Doesn't sound that too out there. Man or human is an immortal spiritual being. That's the belief in Christianity. His experience extends well beyond a single lifetime, also in line with Christianity. His capabilities are unlimited. Well, if we're made in the image of God and we can enjoy the afterlife after, that's not too far out there. Even if we don't presently know it, the ultimate goal is true spiritual enlightenment and freedom. I mean, that's exactly what the goal is in Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism. So the basic ideas here might sound outlandish, but when you really examine them closely, you realize they're not so much different than other traditions that are out there. So when people say Scientology is a cult, are they correct, or are they just saying that because it's a new tradition? Why is it that that traditions that are thousands of years old are looked at as legitimate, even though they contain stories that, if you didn't know about them, might seem quite outlandish? Think about angels coming to Earth and visiting people and telling them they're prophets, like in Zoroastrianism or Islam. Think about being judged by Mithra in Zoroastrianism and walking across this bridge. Think about God flooding the entire earth, like in the story of Noah that comes up in the Abrahamic traditions. Think about Siddhartha, having a battle with the god of desire, Mara. Think about Eden. Adam and Eve living in this garden where there's this talking snake, and a person later comes who is the Son of God and can walk on water and turn water into wine and raise the dead and can be resurrected. All of that kind of sounds like science fiction, but people are used to it. So is Scientology out there, or it's just we're not that used to it? That's a really good question to ask yourself. Here's the symbol of Scientology. So you see the S there for Scientology, and then the pyramids pointing upward for going up in the levels. You know, there was like 7 levels and then 9, and then, you know, one thing is if the secrets of the top OT level is revealed on the internet, what the Scientologist community can do is be like, oh, well, there's a new secret teaching that people didn't know about. So that's only going to go so far. Here's a cover of Time magazine, and you can see the exploding volcano. That's the explosion of the hydrogen bombs in the volcano. And we could kind of get the perspective of Time saying here, Scientology, the cult of greed, so calling it a cult outright. And then here, I'll leave you with Tom Cruise receiving a medal. There's the symbol of Scientology on it from, you know, some prominent part of the church. I'm not exactly sure who that is. Who must be pretty short because Tom Cruise is only, you know, 5'7". So that's kind of interesting. All right, so that's our conclusion of contemporary religions and traditions.